She was 30 floors up when she said it, her breath fog in the glass, wind biting at her gloves. Rich men couldn't handle me. Inside, the man in the tailored suit looked up from his meeting, startled, then smiled. The kind of slow, dangerous smile that changes the air in a room. "Try me," he said through the pain, voice lost in the hum of the city. That single moment, a tease through glass, would unravel two lives built on opposite sides of the skyline. One woman clinging to dignity after loss. One man learning that power means nothing if it can't protect what's human. Sometimes, the people who seem worlds apart are only separated by a window. And a dare. If this story touches your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe now. Let's begin. The wind clawed at the steel bones of Hale Tower, 30 stories above Denver's waking streets. The first light of morning cut through the frozen air like a blade, glinting off the glass facade where Nora Bennett hung suspended, her harness creaking as she leaned into her work. At 38, she'd long stopped fearing the height. What she feared now were unpaid bills and quiet nights that stretched too long. Her gloves squeaked against the window as she wiped a streak of grime from the pane. Beyond the glass, a meeting was already underway. Men in dark suits, glowing screens, the sharp gestures of power. They never looked at her. They never did. But then one of them moved differently. He wasn't gesturing. He was watching. Lucas Hale. She knew the name before she knew the face. The tower bore it, after all. She'd read it on the service forms, on every invoice that kept her small cleaning company alive. Real estate tycoon, 46, the kind of man who built cities and forgot who cleaned them. He stood a few feet from the window, phone pressed to his ear, his gaze fixed not on the skyline, but on her. Nora paused, squeegee in hand, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. Through the glass, his lips moved something short, sharp. She couldn't hear, but she could read tone even without words. A command, probably, or an order to move along. Instead, she raised an eyebrow and mouthed back, "You're welcome." He blinked, clearly caught off guard. The corner of his mouth twitched. That reaction, the faint crack in an otherwise perfect mask, was worth more than her entire day's pay. She reached for the cleaning fluid, sprayed a streak, and in a burst of mischief, traced letters on the fogging glass. "Rich men couldn't handle me." Inside. Lucas froze mid-sentence. The person on his call kept talking. He didn't answer. He read the words, and for the briefest second, Nora thought she'd gone too far. Then he smiled. Not politely, not dismissively like someone remembering what it was to be amused. He ended the call, stepped closer to the glass, and mouthed slowly, deliberately, "Try me." Nora almost laughed out loud. The sound stuck in her throat because the wind picked up just then, swinging her rig hard to the left. Her gloved hand slipped on the soapy edge of the window, the squeegee spinning out of her grasp, vanishing into the air below. The city tilted, for one suspended heartbeat. She felt her stomach lurch, the harness dig into her ribs. The safety clip whined, caught, held. Lucas's hand slammed against the glass, instinctive, useless, but urgent, as if he could hold her through 30 pains and a lifetime of difference. When the rig steadied, Nora exhaled, chest heaving. She met his eyes through the reflection of her own trembling face. He hadn't moved his hand from the glass. Neither did she. For a breath. It was as though they were touching skin to cold glass. Warmth to power. Her crew crackled over the radio. "Boss!" "You good, Nora?" forced her voice steady. "All good. Just wind. Inside." She saw him still watching. Not the kind of watching that made her uncomfortable, but the kind that tried to understand. She gave a little mock salute and mouthed, "Guess you can't handle me after all." He laughed, a silent burst of light against the city's gray. The radio buzzed again, pulling her back to work. Below, traffic roared like distant surf. She adjusted the rig, repositioned her squeegee belt, and continued wiping down the window as if nothing had happened. Yet she felt it, the faint vibration in her chest, a spark too dangerous for the altitude. By the time she moved to the next panel, Lucas had stepped away from the glass. The meeting resumed, figures shifting back into motion. Power moved on, as it always did. But when she descended an hour later, boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud, she looked up instinctively. There, 30 floors above, a figure stood again by the window. He was holding a phone, but he wasn't talking. He was watching her. She shook her head, smiling despite herself, and whispered into the wind, "Try me, huh? We'll see." That night, as she logged invoices in her tiny apartment, she caught herself replaying the moment, the glint of sunlight on glass, his startled half-smile, that ridiculous exchange written in breath and fog. She told herself it was nothing, just a moment of levity in a hard day's work. Still, when she opened her work order for the next week and saw the client name Hale Tower, recurring service contract extended, she couldn't help the way her pulse kicked. Out her window, the city lights blinked like a restless heartbeat. Somewhere above those lights, a man she'd teased through glass had said, "Try me," and for reasons she didn't yet understand, part of her wanted to. The city woke under a gray-blue wash of dawn, soft and cold, the kind of morning that made breath visible. Inside a small apartment south of Colfax Avenue, Nora Bennett poured coffee into a chipped mug and watched steam curl toward a ceiling stained faintly by winter leaks. The radio murmured old country ballads between weather updates, wind advisory, chance of snow by evening, high of 34. She listened without really hearing. Her work gloves hung drying by the radiator, the fabric stiff from yesterday's wind. Rent was due Friday. The envelope sat half-sealed on the counter beside an overdue utilities bill and a stack of receipts clipped neatly together, as though order could keep the anxiety quiet. On the fridge, pinned under a magnet shaped like a sunflower, was a folded flyer. She didn't need to unfold it to know what it said. Cedarview Hospice, where comfort meets dignity. That was where she had held her husband's hand on his final morning 3 winters ago. His laughter still echoed when she poured coffee, the same mug, the same silence afterward. A text buzzed from her crew chief. Tyler 2-hour block at Hale Tower, then the courthouse job. Nora replied with a thumbs-up emoji, though she still disliked using them. They felt too light for a life that was heavy. Across the city, 60 floors above, Lucas Hale was already on his treadmill, barefoot, earbuds in. His penthouse spanned glass to glass, morning light slicing over polished marble, the Rockies sharp in the distance. His watch buzzed at exactly 6:00 m, tracking pulse, efficiency, and control. He drank a green smoothie that tasted like wet grass and self-discipline. The second his assistant's calendar reminder pinged, he was already scrolling through emails. A headline from his development firm flashed bold redevelopment proposal, Parcel E, Cedarview District. He skimmed the attachment without much thought. Another parcel. Another plan? His company would absorb the land. Older buildings would go. New retail and high-end residences would rise. He didn't yet know that Parcel E was home to the same hospice that had once held the last breath of Nora's husband. By 7, he was showered, suited, and driving his silver Range Rover down Spear Boulevard. His mind ticked in numbers, return percentages, investment cycles, square footage. But that morning, when he looked up at his own tower, he slowed. The rig was already moving outside the 30th floor. The same woman, same calm precision. The harness line a taut ribbon against the pale sky. She moved like someone who had made peace with danger. Inside the lobby, his new intern, June Carraway, balanced a tablet and a coffee tray, nearly spilling both when he brushed past her. "Good morning, Mr. Hale," she managed. He nodded absently, still glancing upward through the glass. "Morning, June." June followed his gaze. "You've been watching that window crew all week," she said, half curious, half teasing. He gave a faint, humorless smile. "They're efficient and famous," she replied. "That's Bennett Cleaning. They run the Christmas toy drive every winter for the hospice district. My church donates to it." Lucas stopped walking. "Hospice district? Yes. Cedarview Hospice. My mom volunteers there. It's where June caught herself. Sorry, you probably don't need to know that. But he'd already stored the name somewhere in the precise machinery of his thoughts. At street level, Nora was handing out assignments, voice steady against the wind. Tyler, you take the east wing, I'll handle 30 through 32. Watch for ice on the ledges. Her crew moved with practiced rhythm ropes coiling, belts buckled, gloves tugged tight. They joked the way people do when every mistake could be fatal, with laughter that kept fear at bay. Nora checked the harness twice, always twice, then stepped into the cradle and rose. The skyline spread beneath her, gray towers fading into mist. Somewhere down there, life went on honking horns, bus stops, school crossings. Up here, she could almost believe distance was mercy. She thought again of the man behind the glass yesterday, the expensive calm, the daring smirk. Maybe he'd already forgotten her. People like him didn't replay moments with women like her. But when the rig reached the 24th floor, she noticed something pressed against the window from inside, a paper shape, small, folded carefully, a child's crane. She called over the radio, "Tyler, you seeing this on your side?" He leaned out from the next platform. "Nah, just you. Probably some kid up here after hours." The little crane trembled in the draft. Nora peeled back the suction handle and lifted it free, careful not to tear the fragile wings. It was made from the back of a meeting agenda, the letters faint but legible. "Hope is the thing with feathers." She smiled despite herself. Someone's kid had good taste in poetry. She slipped the crane into her breast pocket for safekeeping, though she couldn't explain why. Downstairs, Lucas's reflection caught her movement in the glass feed from a security monitor. He paused again. The intern noticed. "You really do watch them," June said. He straightened. "Safety check," he said too quickly. But June saw the way his gaze lingered. When Nora's shift ended, her hands ached and her hair smelled of cold air and soap. She clocked out, stuffed her gloves into her back pocket, and walked the 6 blocks home. Denver's late morning light softened the buildings to silver, and from somewhere far above, the wind carried faint echoes of city life laughter, car horns, sirens blending into one long, familiar hum. In her pocket, the paper crane rustled. She unfolded it at a red light and looked again at the line of poetry. It wasn't the kind of message you threw away. At her apartment, she set it gently on the counter beside the rent envelope and the hospice flyer. 3 pieces of paper, each holding a different version of her life survival, grief, and maybe something new. She poured another coffee, black this time, and stood by the window. From here, the skyline shimmered under a pale sun. Somewhere in that glass and steel, a man with too much money and not enough warmth was probably starting his next meeting. Nora raised her mug in an invisible toast toward the city. "To the ones who look but never see," she murmured. Her breath fogged the glass, and for a moment, she thought she saw movement in the reflection. A figure, faint, looking back. But it was only her own. Still, the thought lingered, soft as paper wings, maybe somewhere above those clouds. Someone else had looked up at the same sky and wondered, too. The lunch crowd at Mile High Diner always hit like weather, sudden, loud, impossible to predict. By 2 o'clock, the air was thick with the scent of bacon grease and coffee that had been reheated one time too many. Nora loved it anyway. The diner had been her after-shift refuge for years, a place where no one asked about money or grief, where she could sit at the counter with her sleeves rolled up and her mind quiet for a while. Today, though, her peace cracked the moment the bell over the door chimed, and in walked the last man she expected to see in a place like this. Lucas Hale, polished, pressed, out of context. His suit probably cost more than the entire day's receipts. He paused just inside the door, scanning the room like someone trying to locate a misplaced thought. His gaze landed on her, and something flickered recognition, maybe surprise. "Mr. Hale," Nora said, arching an eyebrow. "You lost." He stepped closer, smiling faintly. "Or maybe I just took the wrong exit. You're about 40 blocks off from the part of town where people wear shoes like that." He glanced down at his Oxford wingtips, amusement ghosting across his face. Then, I'll try not to track in the wrong kind of dirt. The waitress, Annie, handed him a menu with the same suspicion she reserved for health inspectors. He thanked her politely, slid onto the stool beside Nora, and ordered a black coffee, nothing fancy. Nothing he'd actually drink. "You following me, or did the altitude get to your head?" she asked, half smiling. "Neither," he said. "I owed you a proper thank you." "For what?" "For the entertainment value. Most people hang outside my window without a sense of humor." She laughed, shaking her head. "You really came all the way down here to deliver that line." He took a sip of coffee, winced, and muttered, "Maybe." For a moment, neither spoke. The jukebox hummed low in the corner, playing an old John Denver tune that seemed to float on grease and memory. Nora felt the weight of the day in her shoulders, but also something lighter, something almost like curiosity. Still, she didn't trust men like him, men who owned buildings and smiled as if the world bent slightly to their amusement. "Here's a test. Then," she said suddenly. His eyes narrowed just slightly. "A test. Our short-order cook called in sick. Lunch rush starts in 10 minutes. If you want to prove you're not just another rich guy slumming for kicks, roll up those sleeves." He studied her for half a second, then stood, without a word. He followed her behind the counter, hanging his suit jacket on the back of a chair. Annie gaped. "Nora, you serious deadly." The kitchen smelled of onions, old oil, and hard work. Lucas hesitated at the sink, looking absurdly out of place, then took a deep breath and turned on the tap. The water hissed, steaming. "You ever done dishes before?" Nora asked. "I run a company," he said. "That's not what I asked." He met her gaze, held it, then nodded. "When I was a kid, my mom worked 2 jobs. Dishes were my rent." The answer hit her harder than she expected. She said nothing, just handed him a stack of pans blackened from 100 breakfasts. For the next 4 hours, Mile High Diner turned into a blur of orders and motion. Lucas washed without complaint, sleeves rolled to his elbows, tie gone, the heat reddening his face. He moved slower than the staff, but careful, methodical, as if precision could substitute for experience. Nora worked beside him, flipping burgers, sliding plates, shouting orders over the clatter. Every so often she glanced his way, expecting him to quit. He didn't. Customers noticed, of course. Some whispered, others chuckled. A man in a booth nudged his wife. "Ain't that the guy from the business magazine?" She shrugged. Maybe he lost a bet. By 5 o'clock, the crowd thinned. Lucas turned off the tap, drying his hands on a rag that used to be white. His hair was damp, collar stained. He looked human. Nora poured 2 sodas and slid one toward him. "On the house. Consider it your paycheck." He grinned, the kind of smile that didn't feel practiced. "You're underpaying me. Welcome to the service industry." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, both too tired to fill the air with small talk. He looked around at the diner, the faded photos, the chipped counter, the single neon light flickering in the window. "My father used to bring me to a place like this," he said quietly, "before he stopped bringing me anywhere." Nora glanced up. "You lose him." "Not to death," Lucas said, "to ambition." He tapped a finger against the counter. "Guess it runs in the family." There was something raw in his voice she hadn't expected. Before she could respond, his phone buzzed. He ignored it. "Most people would have taken a selfie by now," she said softly. "Proof of charity." "I didn't do charity," he said, finishing his drink. "I did dishes." When he left, he nodded to Annie, dropped a 20 on the counter, and disappeared into the fading light of early evening. Annie walked over, holding the bill, then frowned. "No cash tip," she muttered. Nora smirked. "You sure about that?" Annie jerked her chin toward the kitchen. "Come see." They stepped behind the counter. The sink gleamed, every pan stacked, the floor mopped. Even the grease trap, the one no one ever touched, had been scrubbed spotless. "He didn't tip with money," Annie said, almost reverent. "He cleaned the grease trap." Nora leaned against the wall, arms crossed, a slow smile spreading. "Guess he passed," she murmured. Annie looked puzzled. "Passed what?" "The test," Nora said, but her eyes were distant, thoughtful. She didn't mean the dishes. When Nora stepped outside, the sky had turned the color of cold copper. The city hummed below taxis, laughter, the faint echo of wind between buildings. She pulled her jacket tighter and started toward the bus stop, wondering why she suddenly felt warmer. Up on the hill, Hale Tower caught the last light of sunset. Glass ignited in gold, somewhere behind those walls. She imagined him washing his hands again, still smelling faintly of soap and onions. It made her laugh under her breath. Maybe, she thought, not all rich men were built the same. Still, she wasn't ready to believe in him, not yet. The wind carried a whiff of diner grease and something sweeter. She looked up once more before the bus arrived, whispering, "We'll see, Mr. Hale, we'll see." The first headline appeared on Nora's phone while she was standing in line for coffee at a corner shop near the crew office. She hadn't been looking for it. The photo found her a flash of sequins, champagne, and a smile she'd already memorized. Lucas Hale, attends benefit gala with socialite. Avery Kent, power couple in the making. The image was perfect. He looked relaxed, tuxedo crisp, one hand resting casually on the small of the woman's back. Nora stared at the screen until the barista had to call her name twice. The memory of him at the diner sleeves rolled, grease smudged, quietly human, dissolved under the camera's glare. By the time she reached the job site that morning, the wind had picked up, sharp enough to sting. Tyler whistled low when she passed. "You see that news piece, boss? Your window prints made the front page. Not my anything," she said flatly, tightening the harness strap. He grinned. "Just saying. Maybe he's got range from grease traps to red carpets." "Range isn't depth," she said, and stepped onto the lift before he could reply. Up on the 32nd floor, the city looked colder than usual. The glass bit back reflections like a mirror that refused to flatter. Nora worked silently, every movement clipped and precise, refusing to look toward the side of the building where his office was. Below, people scrolled through their phones, believed what they read, and moved on. She couldn't. She'd spent too many years watching men in suits stand behind podiums promising community renewal, only to bulldoze the very blocks that raised them. They donated in public and demolished in private, and Lucas Hale, with his expensive smile and impossible confidence, fit that pattern too neatly. When the shift ended, she turned her phone face down and didn't pick it up again for 2 days. At Hale Tower, Lucas sat through a meeting he barely heard. The tabloids spun stories he hadn't written. Avery Kent was a fixture at every charity event, charming, relentless, and photogenic. They'd exchanged 2 polite sentences. The rest was camera work. Still, he knew how it looked. June hovered near the door with a stack of files. "Should I issue a statement, sir?" Maybe clarify the rumor he rubbed his temples. No. Let the noise die by itself. But the comments, June. He looked up, his tone gentler. Sometimes silence says more. She nodded, retreating, though she didn't look convinced. Later that week, Lucas scrolled through emails for distraction. One caught his eye, a newsletter from the Cedarview Community Kitchen, part of the hospice district development he'd been reviewing. It listed a shortage in meal sponsorships. The number wasn't large, a few $1,000s, but the image of volunteers serving steaming plates pulled at something unguarded in him. Without thinking too much, he logged into the corporate foundation portal and made the payment. Anonymous donor, initials only, L.H. He clicked submit and exhaled, relieved to do something quiet, something that didn't require a photo op. 2 mornings later, Nora was ladling stew at that same kitchen. The smell of carrots and pepper thick in the air. The chatter of volunteers filled the narrow space, cheerful but tired. Her hands worked automatically. Scoop, serve, smile. She liked this place because no one asked for anything but time. Good news, the coordinator, Maggie, called out. Some mystery sponsor just covered the whole week's meals. We're calling it a miracle." Applause broke out. Nora smiled, wiping sweat from her brow. "What's the name? Just initials." Maggie squinted at the paper. L.Ch. "Whoever it is, bless them." The ladle slipped in Nora's hand, splashing broth across her apron. She muttered a curse and grabbed a towel. "Everything okay?" Maggie asked. "Fine." But her stomach had tightened, same as it did before a storm. She washed her hands, staring at the faucet's slow drip. It couldn't be coincidence. The thought of him watching her from afar, buying his way back into her good graces, made her chest burn. After lunch service, she hung her apron on the hook and stared at it for a long time. The fabric smelled of onions and something more guilt. Maybe? Gratitude twisted with resentment. Outside, snow had started to fall, small white dots against gray air. She stepped out, breath steaming, and looked toward the skyline where Hale Tower pierced the clouds. She imagined him in some penthouse office, sipping imported coffee, completely unaware of how charity could sometimes wound more than neglect. Her phone buzzed again, another headline. Hale Foundation expands philanthropy efforts amid rumors of romance. Of course, even his silence became a headline. Nora turned off the screen and shoved it deep into her pocket. She was done being anyone's good story. That evening, she tried to lose herself in routine dishes, laundry, the hum of her old radiator, but nothing dulled the ache of distrust curling in her ribs. Maybe she'd misread him from the start. Maybe he was just another man passing through, collecting moments the way his kind collected real estate acquiring, never keeping. When she finally sat down, she found the paper crane on the counter beside the rent envelope. She picked it up, smoothing its creases, then turned it over. It still carried the faint imprint of the poem's line, "Hope is the thing with feathers." She traced the words with her thumb and whispered, "Maybe hope's just paper in the wind." The crane caught a draft from the open window, fluttering in her hand as though ready to fly. She closed her fingers around it instead, holding it still fragile, foolish, and hers. Somewhere across town, a man who didn't know what else to do with his guilt stared out over the same city, wondering if good intentions ever made a difference once they had been misunderstood. Neither of them would know that night that both were watching the same snowfall, two silhouettes behind separate panes of glass. Each believing the other had turned away first. The wind always changed fastest on Fridays. Nora knew that. She'd learned to read its mood by the way the rig cables trembled, a warning hum before the gusts came. Still, this morning felt ordinary enough when she stepped into the cradle. Coffee warm in her veins. Sky a deep, cold blue over Denver. The weather report said 12-mile-per-hour winds. Manageable, predictable, but the weather, like people, had moods you couldn't chart. By the time her platform reached the 29th floor, the gusts had started to kick below. The city shimmered, busy and small. Above, clouds crawled fast across the sun, dimming the light to pewter. Tyler's voice crackled over the headset. "We might cut it short. Boss, forecast just changed. Give me 10 more minutes," she said. "We finished this row. We're clear." From inside the tower, glass turned to mirror. She could see herself harnessed tight, face steady, but behind her reflection, movement caught her eye. Lucas Hale, suit jacket off, talking animatedly to a group of executives. He didn't notice her, or if he did, he pretended not to. That was fine. She'd stopped expecting anything from him. Then the wind howled, sharp and mean. The rig jolted sideways, slamming against the glass with a sound like thunder. Nora's knees buckled. The squeegee flew from her hand, clattering against the pane before vanishing into the wind. The safety line went taut, wrenching her body sideways. For a dizzying second, she dangled against the glass. Only the harness between her and the 30-story fall. Tyler. She gasped into the radio. "Lock line." North corner. Static answered, then his voice, faint but steady. "Hold on. Nora. I'm on it. Inside. Heads turned. The conference froze. Lucas looked up from his presentation just in time to see her body swing out over the edge, a blur of orange jacket and flailing cable. He dropped his phone. "Get building security," he barked, already moving. 32nd floor, west facade, emergency lock. The executive stared. He shoved past them, sprinting for the corridor, pulling up the internal blueprint on his tablet as he ran. His voice was clipped, frantic. Access point, north corner, maintenance hatch near stairwell B. Go now. He hit the glass wall of his office and slammed his palm against it, helpless. Nora's face flashed into view for an instant, eyes squeezed shut against the wind. "Don't you dare fall," he whispered to no one who could hear him. Outside, Nora fought the swing, boots scraping glass, harness cutting into her ribs. Her pulse pounded loud enough to drown out the wind. She reached for the stabilizer rope, fingers slipping once, twice, before catching hold. Tyler's voice shouted again through the static. "Got it locked. You're secure." The rig steadied, shuddered, then held. For a long moment, she couldn't move. The city below was just noise and motion cars, people, everything she wasn't ready to leave behind. She pressed her forehead to the cold glass, breath fogging it. When she opened her eyes, Lucas was there, palms flat on the other side, his mouth moving. She couldn't hear the words, but she didn't need to. His face said enough, fear, raw and unmasked. Minutes later, emergency crews arrived, voices echoing through her headset. They reeled the rig to the rooftop, paramedics waiting. She waved them off, saying she was fine, though her legs trembled and her left ankle ached from the jolt. Lucas met her at the rooftop access, hair tousled, tie gone, the veneer of composure cracked clean through. "You're going to the hospital," he said. "I'm not," she replied, pulling off her gloves. "It's just a bruise. Your ankle I've had worse." He exhaled hard. "Then at least let me drive you." She stared at him, weighing the offer. A limo ride to the ER that'd make a great story. "Then don't call it a limo," he said. "Call it a car, or a seat that isn't hanging off the side of my building." Against her better judgment, she let him help her down the stairwell. He didn't touch her, just kept close enough that she could lean if she needed to. The car ride was silent. City lights blurred against the window, reflections of two people who had run out of things they understood about each other. At the urgent care center, the nurse confirmed a mild sprain, wrapped it, gave her an ice pack, and left them in a sterile hallway smelling of disinfectant and too much quiet. Nora sat on the edge of the cot, ankle propped, staring at the scuffed tile. Lucas stood beside her, hands shoved in his pockets, jacket draped over his arm. After a moment, he stepped forward and placed it gently over her shoulders. "You didn't have to stay," she said, voice low. "I couldn't leave." She let out a soft, humorless laugh. "You're acting like I almost died." His eyes flicked up to hers. "You almost did." That truth hung heavy between them. She shifted under his jacket, feeling the warmth still clinging to the fabric. "I'm nobody you can fix, Lucas," she said finally. "Don't try." He hesitated, then crouched to meet her eye level. "Maybe I'm not trying to fix anything," he said quietly. "Maybe I'm just trying to listen." She looked away, throat tightening. The fluorescent light hummed above them. Somewhere down the hall, a door clicked shut, echoing like a full stop at the end of something she couldn't yet name. When the nurse returned with discharge papers, Nora took them wordlessly. Lucas waited while she signed, then walked her to the exit. Outside, dusk had deepened into a thin mist. The city felt smaller now, edges softened by the fading light. He opened the car door for her, but she shook her head. "I'll take the bus. I need the air, Nora." "Don't," she said, not unkindly. "If you want to help, just don't make it a headline." He nodded, jaw tightening, and stepped back. She limped to the bus stop, jacket still around her shoulders, unsure why she hadn't handed it back. When she looked over, he was still standing by the car, watching but not approaching. The bus came. She climbed aboard, took a seat near the back. Through the window, the city streaked past in smears of gold and gray. She touched the collar of his jacket, still warm, and closed her eyes. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel angry, just tired and, against all logic, a little less alone. The box was small enough to fit beneath Nora's bed, yet it held most of the life she'd lived before everything went sideways. She brought it out on quiet nights, nights when the city lights blinked like slow heartbeats beyond her window and sleep refused to come. The lid creaked when she lifted it. Inside a tarnished diner pin shaped like a coffee cup, her mother's, from the years she worked double shifts along I-70, a photograph with corners curled, showing two women smiling behind a chrome counter. A faded cassette labeled L 1996 in her own teenage handwriting, and the paper crane, now smooth flat as though it had grown tired of flying. She turned the cassette over in her hands. The ink was smudged, but the memory of that summer was sharp. She'd sat at the kitchen table with her mother's old recorder, capturing every sound she loved: crickets, the radio, her mom humming some hybrid lullaby that began as "hush," "little baby," and melted into a Debussy phrase she could never name. Her mother used to say it calmed the customers at the diner. Music changes how a room breathes. Nora, even if it's off-key. Nora smiled at that. Off-key had become her entire life. She placed the cassette back in the box, tucked it beneath the bed, and reached for her boots. There was a community meeting that evening, neighborhood renewal, zoning concerns, the kind of things she cared about even when she swore she was too tired to. By 6, she was in the basement of St. Mary's Church, where coffee was free and optimism came cheap. Folding chairs creaked, papers shuffled, someone's child cried. The talk was about rising rents, construction dust, and a new development proposal, Hail Urban Renewal, Parcel E. The words made her chest tighten, though she said nothing. She took notes in the margins of a flyer, half listening, half hearing her mother's voice instead. When the meeting ended, people filtered out, voices fading into the parking lot. Nora lingered. The old upright piano in the corner seemed to call to her. Its wood was scratched, the keys yellowed, but it still held tune well enough for ghosts. She sat down, flexing her sore fingers, and pressed a key. The note was thin, wobbly, but alive. Her hands moved slowly at first, tracing a memory. The melody stumbled through hush. Little baby, then wove into something older, deeper. The Debussy phrase her mother used to hum when washing dishes. When the night felt too long, from there, she added her own notes, half improvisation, half prayer. The church lights hummed softly overhead. Dust floated in the beam that slanted across the piano lid. Nora closed her eyes. She didn't notice the door standing ajar behind her, or the man pausing in the corridor outside. Lucas Hale had been walking home from a dinner meeting nearby when he heard that melody, fractured and familiar. He stopped mid-stride, heart stuttering as if the sound had reached some forgotten room inside him. He followed the notes down the hall to the open door of St. Mary's basement. There she was, Nora Bennett, bent over the piano, her hair loose, the same woman who had once laughed at him through a pane of glass and nearly fallen 30 floors. The music wrapped around her like smoke, tender and unguarded. He leaned against the doorway, afraid to move. The song shifted a child's tune tangled with something classical, something sad. He didn't know why it hurt so much to hear it. Then, memory arrived uninvited. A booth in a roadside diner, maybe 25 years ago. A boy with scuffed sneakers and a half-eaten piece of pie. His mother, bone-tired and smiling, chatting with a waitress whose laughter sounded like sunlight. And from the kitchen, that same melody, humming through the clatter of dishes and the whir of a milkshake blender. He'd fallen asleep there more nights than he could count. Cheek pressed against vinyl, the lullaby seeping into his dreams. He'd forgotten her name, forgotten the town, but not the song. It had been a kindness he'd never repaid, a small mercy in the noise of his childhood. And now, impossibly, the sound lived again here, through this woman. Nora's hands slowed, the last chord hanging in the air like breath. She sighed, leaned back, and smiled faintly at no one. Lucas wanted to speak, to step forward, to say I know that song, but something in the stillness held him back. This moment belonged to her, not him. He stayed until the echo faded, then quietly stepped away, heart thudding. Outside, the air smelled of rain. He looked up at the night sky, its edges blurred by city light, and thought about how music could fold time, how a few notes could bridge years without asking permission. In the distance, the church bell struck 7. He started walking again, slower now, somewhere behind him. Nora locked the church door and headed toward the bus stop, unaware that anyone had listened. She felt oddly lighter. Playing had stirred something she hadn't realized she'd lost, the simple pleasure of creating beauty for no reason. On the bus, she leaned her head against the cold window, the lullaby replaying softly in her mind. When she reached home, she found Lucas's jacket still hanging on her chair. She hadn't returned it. Maybe she didn't want to yet. She brushed her fingers across the collar and whispered the first line of the tune, barely audible, like a promise to no one in particular. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping softly against the glass, steady, rhythmic, almost like accompaniment, and somewhere across the city, a man stood at his window, humming a melody he hadn't remembered in decades, unsure whether the ache in his chest was nostalgia or the beginning of something that finally mattered. The notice was stapled crookedly to the side of a telephone pole on Cedarview Street, just another sheet of bureaucratic language fluttering in the wind. Nora might have walked past it if not for the name that caught her eye, Hale Urban Renewal, Parcel E. She froze. Parcel E. The old brick hospice. The one with ivy crawling up its walls like time refusing to let go. The place where she'd held her husband's hand through his final breath. Where the nurses had whispered prayers over patients whose families couldn't make it in time. Her coffee went cold in her hand. She read the notice twice, then a third time. The jargon was dense redevelopment zone, pending review, proposed commercial mixed-use structure, but the meaning was crystal clear. They were going to tear it down. She folded the paper, tucking it into her jacket like evidence, and started walking. It wasn't until she reached the bus stop that the anger found her not hot, but cold and steady, the kind that clarified rather than clouded. She'd seen this before, men in suits with spreadsheets deciding what memories were worth keeping. By the time she arrived at Hale Tower, the receptionist had already begun to fidget. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Nora said evenly. "But tell Mr. Hale Nora Bennett's here. He'll want to see me." The woman blinked, hesitated, then picked up the phone. Moments later, the elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. Nora stepped inside, gripping the folded notice so tightly it wrinkled in her hand. The air smelled faintly of pine and money. Lucas was standing by the glass wall when she entered his office. The skyline behind him was dazzling, all light and distance. He turned, surprised, then softened. "Nora." "You're save it," she said. "I came to return your jacket. And something else." She dropped the folded notice onto his desk. He glanced down, scanning the header, his jaw tightening as he read. "I thought you should see what your name is attached to," she said quietly. He met her gaze, confusion shifting to unease. "This is one of a dozen projects my team's evaluating. I haven't read it. Maybe you should. Parcel E isn't empty land. Lucas, it's Cedarview Hospice." The words landed like a gavel. He looked up sharply. "The hospice. Where my husband died," she said. "Where dozens of people die with dignity every year. The one place in this city that doesn't turn pain into profit." Lucas's expression changed, not guilt exactly, but the kind of realization that hurts because it demands action. "I didn't know. That's the problem," she said. "People like you never do until it's too late." Silence settled over the room. The wind outside pressed against the windows, making them hum faintly, as if even the city wanted to listen. Lucas stepped around the desk, his tone careful. "This plan isn't finalized. There are options." "Options." Nora cut in. You mean alternative facades, different window treatments, maybe a plaque in the lobby to honor the place you bulldozed. You'll save a skyline and erase a sanctuary. He flinched at her words. That's not fair. Neither is dying in a hallway because your city ran out of rooms that cared. They stood in the same air, close enough to feel each other's breath, but miles apart in what they believed about the world. Lucas looked away first, running a hand through his hair. You want me to fix this? I can't promise that overnight. I'm not asking for promises, she said, voice steady. I'm giving you 72 hours. 3 days, find another footprint for your tower, or I'll make sure every news outlet in Denver knows you're evicting the dying. Something flickered behind his eyes. Not offense, but respect. You'd do that. In a heartbeat. He exhaled slowly, then nodded. All right, 72 hours. You'll try. I'll try. He paused. No guarantees. Good, she said. Because guarantees are cheap. Effort isn't. Nora turned to leave, but something in his voice stopped her. Why tell me this yourself? She hesitated at the door. Because I wanted to look you in the eye when you learned what your money costs. He didn't answer. He couldn't. When the elevator doors closed behind her, Lucas sank into his chair and stared at the notice. The hospice's name looked so small, printed beneath the development header, a footnote under progress. He thought of the song from the church, the way it had stirred something buried deep, the memory of his mother wiping tables in a place that smelled of coffee and mercy. He wondered if that diner still existed, or if someone like him had already turned it into a parking lot. By the time the sun set, his office lights still burned. June Carraway poked her head in, tentative. Sir, you're still here. He looked up, eyes unfocused. Get me the full brief on Parcel E. And everything about that hospice finances, zoning, ownership. June blinked. Now, he said, his voice low but certain. Across town. Nora sat on the stoop outside her apartment, jacket around her shoulders, city lights flickering in the puddles at her feet. She should have felt triumphant she'd said what needed to be said, but instead there was only ache. Her husband's laughter floated through memory, gentle and kind. Fight for good. Nora, he used to tell her, but don't forget who you're fighting for. She whispered to the night. I haven't... Still. She couldn't shake the image of Lucas's face when she'd said erase a sanctuary. It hadn't been anger, it had been something far more dangerous, understanding. And she knew from experience that understanding could change people, or destroy them. The Denver Museum of Art shimmered that night like something unreal, glass walls glinting beneath chandeliers, polished marble reflecting the sweep of gowns and tuxedos. Nora had never felt more out of place. The invitation had arrived 2 days after her confrontation at Hale Tower, Community Leadership Recognition Banquet Guest, Representative Cedarview District. She'd thought about ignoring it, but Maggie from the hospice kitchen had clasped her hands and said, Go, Nora. Sometimes they need to see our faces in their rooms. So here she was, standing near the back of the ballroom, her one black dress pressed smooth, a borrowed clutch in hand, and the uneasy knowledge that the man whose name glowed on every banner was somewhere in this crowd. Across the room, Lucas Hale was shaking hands with donors, his composure restored. Cameras flashed, laughter carried through the air like champagne bubbles. If he saw her, he didn't show it. She told herself she didn't care. She was here for Cedarview, not him. The MC's voice echoed through the speakers. Tonight, we celebrate progress. The builders, the dreamers, the developers reshaping Denver's skyline. Applause thundered. Nora clapped politely, feeling her stomach twist. At her table, a city planner leaned over. You're Bennett, right from the window, crew's brave of you to come. Folks upstairs were buzzing about your little meeting with Hale. It wasn't a meeting, she said evenly. It was a warning. He chuckled. Call it what you want. You rattled the right cage. The lights dimmed. The main program began slideshow of projects, cheerful sound bites, statistics about growth and revitalization. When the image of Hale Urban Renewal, Parcel E, appeared, Nora's heart dropped. The caption read, "Future of Denver, a vision for tomorrow." Her hand curled around the tablecloth. The host, a well-fed developer named Mark Stratham, took the stage. "Some of you have heard the noise about Parcel E," he said, voice oozing confidence. "But progress has always scared people. Some folks just can't handle change." Laughter rippled through the room. Something in Nora snapped. She stood before she even realized it, her chair scraping against marble. "Or maybe," she said, voice clear, cutting through the hum, "some men can't handle a woman who says no." The laughter died. Heads turned. The spotlight, almost cruelly, found her. Mark blinked, flustered. "Excuse me? You heard me," Nora said. "You talk about progress, but you're planning to bulldoze a hospice, a place where dying people get to finish life with dignity because it doesn't fit your skyline." Murmurs surged like a tide. Mark smirked, recovering his swagger. "Miss Bennett, isn't it? I admire your passion. But these decisions are complex. Sentimentality doesn't build cities. Neither does greed," she shot back, for a heartbeat. The room was silent. Every face, every camera pointed her way. Then another voice cut through. Smooth but firm. "Miss Bennett's right." Lucas stepped out from the wings. Tuxedo crisp, expression unreadable. The crowd's collective gasp was audible. He took the microphone from the startled host. "Change means nothing if it erases compassion. I've reviewed Parcel E. She's correct, the plan would displace Cedarview Hospice. That's on me." The tension in the room shifted curiosity, replacing confusion. Lucas turned toward Nora, meeting her eyes. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The chatter, the lights, the watching world. He said, slowly, "Maybe it's time to prove that business and humanity don't have to be enemies." He faced the crowd again. "I'm setting a public commitment, a challenge, if you will. 30 days. In 30 days. My firm will redesign the Parcel E project to preserve Cedarview Hospice on its current site. If we can't, I'll withdraw the proposal entirely." A stunned silence followed. Even the photographers hesitated before realizing what they'd just witnessed. Then the flashes began blinding, relentless. Questions erupted. "Are you serious? What about investors? Can it be done?" Lucas raised a hand. Calm but firm. "Progress means risk. I'll take it." The MC tried to regain control, stammering into the microphone. "Well, that's certainly unexpected." Nora's pulse roared in her ears. She stared at Lucas, unsure whether to admire him or curse him. Public pressure had just turned her private crusade into a spectacle. He looked back at her, a half-smile tugging his mouth. "You challenged me once," he said, voice just loud enough for her to hear. "Told me rich men couldn't handle you." Her lips parted. He smirked. "Try me." Gasps and whispers filled the ballroom. Every camera caught at the exchange, the echo of their first encounter through glass. The crowd's energy swelled like a rising tide. Nora's face flushed. She wanted to speak, to remind everyone that this wasn't about flirtation or theater, but about lives real, fragile lives. Yet even she couldn't deny the gravity of what he'd just done. By tying his promise to her words, Lucas had made it impossible to back down without humiliation. The mayor's aide leaned toward a reporter. "If he pulls this off, he'll be a legend. And if he fails," the reporter asked. The aide smiled thinly. "Then he's finished." As the applause grew hesitant at first, then thunderous, Lucas handed the mic back and stepped away from the stage. Nora caught up to him in the corridor, where the music dulled behind heavy doors. "You had no right to do that," she said, breath quick. "No right to agree with you. No right to turn it into a bet. It was already a fight," he said softly. "At least now, it has a clock." She stared at him, anger and admiration tangled tight. "You just wagered your reputation." He met her gaze steadily. 72 hours wasn't long enough. Maybe 30 days will be. She didn't reply. The noise from the ballroom swelled again, applause, laughter, the birth of a headline. Lucas adjusted his cufflinks, exhaled, and said, "I meant what I said. Nora, try me." Her pulse fluttered, betraying her calm. "You might regret that." "Maybe," he said, "but maybe not." He turned back toward the ballroom lights, every eye waiting for him, every flash ready to define him. Nora stood in the corridor, heart pounding, watching as the doors closed behind him. The noise faded, replaced by the distant echo of a song she hadn't realized the orchestra had started to play soft, deliberate, hauntingly familiar. She took a breath, clutching her clutch tight, and whispered into the still air. "Then let's see if you can keep the rhythm, Mr. Hale." The next morning's headline read, "Hale's Gamble, 30 Days to Save a Hospice." And just like that, what began as a dare became Denver's most watched countdown. Cameras waited outside Hale Tower. Reporters hounded Nora outside the community center. Every move became public theater hero or hypocrite, depending on the day's spin. The first week, adrenaline carried them both. Lucas assembled his team in the top floor boardroom, the skyline stretching endlessly behind him. Engineers laid out models. Architects spread blueprints like battle plans. June Caraway scribbled formulas for air rights and lot transfers on glass walls. "What if we build over?" Not instead of, June suggested, marker squeaking. "Elevate the residential units. Keep the hospice on the ground level. Maybe even integrate a community garden. It'll lead into profit margins," the CFO said. Lucas didn't look up. Then it eats into them. Keep going. They worked 14-hour days. Lenders frowned. Lawyers frowned harder. Lucas's phone became an extension of his hand. He skipped dinners, forgot weekends. For the first time in years, he wasn't chasing gain, he was trying to balance mercy and math. Meanwhile, Nora was waging her own war on the ground. She set up tables outside the hospice with clipboards and pens. She taught elderly neighbors how to speak at zoning hearings, how to tell their stories into microphones that usually silence them. "Keep it under 2 minutes," she told them. "Facts first, feelings after. You'll be surprised which one sticks harder." Her crew helped between shifts. Tyler stapled flyers to lamp posts. Volunteers passed out coffee and soup. When exhaustion crept in, Nora kept moving, because she'd promised and because somewhere deep down, she believed that if Lucas Hale was willing to fight, she'd meet him halfway. By day 14, progress looked real. A revised design had cleared preliminary review. The renderings were beautiful glass arcs and green space, the old brick hospice preserved like a heartbeat inside a new frame. June had started calling it the Halo Plan. But hope has a habit of costing more than it can pay. By day 21, the first lender pulled out. Too expensive, too slow, not enough return. Then another. Lucas tried to renegotiate interest rates, leverage assets, call in favors. He met with investors in rooms that smelled of expensive whiskey and subtle doubt. "You can't save everyone," one told him. "Watch me," he replied. But by day 25, even he could see the numbers fraying. At the hospice, Nora kept her optimism for others, not herself. She was tired, her voice hoarse from speaking at hearings, her body aching from working shifts she didn't have time for. That evening, she stopped by the Cedarview courtyard. Snow dusted the stone benches. The paper crane she'd placed on the memorial fountain weeks ago was gone, probably blown away. She sat anyway, whispering into the air, "If you're listening, Sam, I could use a miracle." The next morning, she got the opposite. Day 27. The city planning board met under fluorescent lights that made everyone look guilty. Lucas stood before them, the new design projected behind him. Nora sat in the back row, hands clasped, eyes fixed on him. He spoke calmly, clearly no arrogance, no spin. "This is more than preservation. It's partnership. The hospice serves those who built this city. We owe them more than a plaque." When he finished, there was a ripple of applause quickly hushed. The board deliberated for 22 minutes. Then came the vote. 4 in favor, 5 against. The gavel struck. Motion denied. Lucas's shoulders dropped, just slightly. June pressed her lips together, eyes wet. Across the room, Nora's heart sank. The reporters swarmed the second the meeting adjourned. "Mr. Hale, are you withdrawing from the project? Will you appeal? Is this the end of Parsley?" He paused in the hallway, cameras flashing like lightning. For a moment, Nora thought he'd retreat behind the familiar armor corporate calm, practiced lines, but he didn't. He faced the microphones and said, "We failed the math, not the mission. It wasn't a slogan, it was exhaustion, truth laid bare." He continued, quieter now. "Sometimes numbers don't tell the story right. We'll find another way. But tonight, I'm proud of what my team built on paper and in spirit." Then he turned and walked past the reporters. No handlers, no press release, just a man who'd lost publicly and refused to disguise it. Nora watched him go, something breaking open in her chest. Later that night, she found herself outside Hale Tower without meaning to. The lobby was empty, the security guard half asleep at his desk. Through the glass, she saw Lucas alone in the conference room, lights low, jacket off, sleeves rolled. He was erasing figures from a whiteboard, slow, methodical, like someone mourning quietly. She thought about going in, then she didn't. Instead, she pulled a small folded shape from her pocket, another paper crane she'd made that morning from a flyer corner, and pressed it against the glass of the tower's entrance, just beside the company logo. It looked tiny there, absurdly fragile against steel and glass. She stepped back, hands deep in her coat pockets, and whispered to herself, "We failed the math, not the mission." For the first time in days, the words didn't sound like defeat. The diner sat like a ghost beside I-70, its sign half lit, the word frontier, missing the O, flickering weakly in the dusk. Paint peeled from the siding, and the windows wore a film of dust thick enough to turn reflections into shadows. Nora parked beside the cracked curb, engine ticking in the cold. She wasn't sure why she'd said yes when Lucas had called that morning. His voice had been quiet, almost hesitant. "There's something I need to show you," he'd said. "It's not business, it's personal." She stepped out into the wind, pulling her coat tighter. The sky was the color of wet asphalt, clouds heavy with the promise of snow. Lucas was already there, leaning against his car, hands shoved into the pockets of his coat. For once, he didn't look like the man who ran towers, just a man standing where something once mattered. "I haven't been here in over 30 years, he said as she approached. Didn't even know it was still standing. She looked up at the sign, then at him. "What is this place? A piece of my past," he said simply. "And, I think, yours." The door creaked open when he pushed it, the bell above still managing a tired jingle. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and old sugar. The booths were cracked vinyl, the counter chipped, but the bones were the same. Nora ran her fingers over the worn wood. "Feels like a place my mom would have loved." He smiled, a small, almost reverent expression. She did. Her head snapped toward him. Lucas walked to the third booth from the back, near the jukebox. He crouched down, reaching beneath the seat, feeling along the edge of the paneling until his fingers found something taped there. He pulled out a yellowed envelope, its corners brittle. "I left this here when I was a kid," he said softly. "Didn't think I'd ever see it again." He opened it carefully. Inside was a faded Polaroid, a little boy with a gap-toothed grin, holding a slice of pie bigger than his head. Behind him, smiling down with a waitress's apron and kind eyes, stood a woman Nora would have recognized anywhere, even if time had blurred her memory. Her breath caught. "That's my mother," she whispered. Lucas nodded. Her name tag said Ruth. She worked nights. I was maybe 10. My mom was sick a lot back then. Couldn't always make dinner. Ruth used to slip me extra fries, tell me stories, while she cleaned tables. She said music could make even an empty place feel alive. Nora sat down slowly, staring at the photo as if afraid it would dissolve. She used to hum a lullaby mixed a children's tune with Debussy. Drove me crazy because I could never tell where one ended and the other began. Lucas's eyes softened. "That's the one." I used to fall asleep right here, in this booth, listening to her hum it while the neon buzzed outside. It's the last sound I remember before my mother passed. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full thick with shared loss and recognition. Nora reached into her bag, fingers trembling, and pulled out the old cassette she'd found weeks ago. The label was smudged, but the faded ink still read L. 1996. She set it on the table between them. "This tape," she said. "I recorded my mom humming that same song the summer before she died. I labeled it L for lullaby. But maybe," her voice wavered, "maybe it was also for Lucas." He stared at it, his throat working. "I don't believe in fate," he said quietly. "But this feels close." She pressed the cassette into his hand. "Keep it. She'd like that." He shook his head. "It's yours." "No," Nora said, her smile trembling. "It was always meant to find its way back." Snow began to drift past the window, soft as ash. The diner lights flickered once, then steadied. Lucas placed the Polaroid on the table beside the cassette. "She was kind," he said. "I never thanked her. You just did." He looked up at her, eyes bright in the low light. "Do you ever think some people enter your life just long enough to leave the door open for someone else I do now?" she said. They sat there for a while, the only sound the faint hum of a dying refrigerator and the whisper of snow outside. For the first time since his public failure, Lucas looked lighter. The edges of his posture softened, the tension in his jaw eased. "Thank you for coming," he said after a long moment. "I didn't know how else to explain it, but somehow, you being here makes it make sense." Nora smiled gently. "Maybe it's not about explaining. Maybe it's just about remembering." He nodded. "Then let's remember." He reached into his coat and pulled out his phone. The screen glowed briefly as he snapped a photo of the Polaroid and cassette side by side, past and present sharing the same frame. As they stood to leave, Nora glanced back one last time at the booth, at the faint indentation in the vinyl where a boy once slept and a waitress once sang. "Funny," she said quietly, "how everything that matters starts with someone being kind when they didn't have to." Outside, the snow thickened, the neon frontier flickered once more before dying completely, leaving the diner bathed in the soft orange of Lucas's car headlights. He held the door for her. Neither spoke during the short walk to their cars. Words felt too small for what had just unfolded. Before getting in, Nora looked over her shoulder. "You said you don't believe in fate," she said. "I didn't." He replied, "Now I'm not sure what I believe." She smiled, sad, but real. "Maybe that's a start." He nodded once, watching her drive away until the taillights disappeared down the dark stretch of highway. Then he turned back to the diner, the envelope in his hand, snow collecting in his hair. Inside that envelope was a life he'd forgotten. Outside, maybe, was one he was still learning how to deserve. 2 days after the diner, Nora found herself standing once again in front of Hale Tower, snow melting beneath her boots. The paper crane she had left there weeks before was gone, washed away by weather or swept by some janitor who didn't know what it meant. This time, Lucas had called her. His voice had been steady but softer than usual. "I have a proposal, but I can't do it alone." She'd almost said no. She'd told herself she was done with his kind of promises. Yet something in his tone, that raw sincerity she'd only heard once before in the sterile hallway of the urgent care, made her say yes. Now she stood in his office. The city sprawled below, sunlight bleeding gold through the clouds. On the table between them lay blueprints, sketches, and legal pads scribbled with numbers. Lucas looked different, tired, unshaven, but more real than she'd ever seen him. "I've been awake for 48 hours, he admitted, "but I think I found a third way." Nora crossed her arms, wary but curious. "A third way?" He gestured to the model, a layered set of transparent sheets. "We keep the hospice right where it is, no relocation, no disruption. The new residential complex builds upward across the adjacent lot, not over it. We purchase vertical air rights. shift the footprint slightly north, and share infrastructure. It cuts profit, but it saves the sanctuary. She leaned closer, scanning the blueprints. You're talking about a land swap and air rights transfer. That's ambitious. Ambitious, he said, smiling faintly, but possible. The city still gets its tax revenue. The investors still get returns. The hospice gets to live. And what do you get? She asked. He hesitated, then said, a chance to build something that doesn't erase what came before. It was quiet for a moment, the kind of silence that feels like fragile ground. She exhaled slowly. You'll need more than numbers to sell this. You'll need the community's trust. I know, he said. That's why I need you. Nora blinked. I can't make this plan look like charity, he said. It can't come from me. It has to come from both of us. A partnership, builder and neighbor, progress and preservation. She studied him for a long moment. You really think people will believe that you and me after everything? They'll believe it if we do. The simplicity of that answer unsettled her. She turned toward the window. The city stretched endlessly cranes, rooftops, exhaust rising in pale threads. Somewhere out there, her husband's name still lingered on the hospice wall, engraved in a small brass plaque. Somewhere out there, her mother's voice still echoed in the chords of a half-forgotten lullaby. She thought of both of them people who'd taught her that dignity wasn't a luxury. It was a right. When she looked back at Lucas, she saw not the man who owned the skyline, but the boy who'd once fallen asleep in a diner booth to her mother's song. I'll help you, she said finally. But this isn't about saving your project. It's about saving people who can't fight for themselves. I know, he said quietly. And I'm not your decoration at a press conference. He smiled. You'd set the podium on fire before that happened. She tried not to return. The smile failed. Probably. They spent the next few hours bent over the table, revising zoning requests, rewriting the proposal into language that blended technical precision with moral clarity. Lucas worked with an intensity that was almost obsessive, and Nora's practicality grounded it. When he suggested naming the community fund after the company, she shook her head. No brands. It's not about you. What? Then call it the Dignity Fund. Let it stand for what it's supposed to. He paused, then nodded. The Dignity Fund, he repeated softly, as if testing the words. Outside, daylight faded into a slow dusk. Snow flurries brushed against the windows, scattering light like falling ash. Finally. Lucas straightened, sliding a document across the table, a memorandum of understanding, neatly typed, ready for signatures. This makes it real, he said. You'd be listed as a community co-sponsor, equal say in all decisions related to the hospice's protection and the fund's oversight. Nora looked down at the paper, pen resting beside her hand. You're sure about this? I've never been more sure of anything I couldn't control. She smiled faintly. That's a strange sentence for a man like you. He met her eyes. Strange is where the truth usually starts. For a long moment, she just stared at the page. Signing meant responsibility, but it also meant belief, and she wasn't sure which scared her more. Then she picked up the pen. Her hand trembled only once as she wrote her name in dark ink. When she finished, she hesitated, then added a single line beneath the signature, in her own looping script, Dignity First. Lucas read the words, his expression softening. That's perfect. It's not perfect, she said. It's just honest. He reached for her hand, then stopped himself halfway, unsure if the moment allowed it. She noticed, and for once, didn't pull away. Outside, the city glowed not harshly, but gently, as if it, too, was exhaling. Nora stood, gathering her things. You've got one chance to prove this isn't another promise on paper. He nodded. Then I'll make the paper hold. She paused at the door, hand on the frame. Don't make me regret this. Lucas, I won't, he said softly. Not this time. When she left, he lingered by the table, staring at her handwriting, that simple phrase anchoring the bottom of the page like a vow, dignity first. He whispered it aloud, almost like a prayer, before signing his own name beneath it. Snow kept falling outside, slow and steady, blanketing the city in white, covering everything, at least for a moment, in a quiet kind of grace. The zoning hearing was already a battlefield by the time Nora arrived. The marble lobby of City Hall buzzed with voices, reporters clutching microphones, city planners shuffling binders, protest signs leaning against walls like tired soldiers. In the chamber, the long table gleamed under fluorescent light. At one end sat Lucas Hale, jaw tight, papers neatly aligned in front of him. Across from him, the city commissioners whispered among themselves, the words Hale versus. Hale passing through the air like static. Nora slipped into the front row, her heart drumming. She'd been through hearings before, but never one that felt like a family wound about to bleed in public. The room quieted when the next name was called, Robert Hale. Hale Enterprises. A man stepped forward, taller than Lucas, older by 2 decades, but unmistakably of the same mold, the same always, the same controlled movements. His suit was immaculate, his silver hair combed to perfection. His smile carried the weight of practiced charm. "Members of the commission," Robert began, voice rich and commanding. "I appreciate the opportunity to speak, but I must say, what we've witnessed over the past month has been disheartening." He turned slightly, gaze settling on his son. 30 days of posturing disguised as philanthropy. I taught Lucas better arithmetic than this sentimental math. A ripple of uneasy laughter moved through the room. Nora felt her stomach turn. She glanced at Lucas. His face didn't move, but his knuckles whitened against the table's edge. Robert continued, his tone growing sharper. "This city doesn't run on feelings. It runs on balance sheets. My son seems to have forgotten that. You cannot build compassion into a blueprint, and you certainly can't legislate morality into a profit margin." He looked directly at Lucas now. "Progress requires sacrifice. Son. Always has." The word son hung in the air like an accusation. Lucas rose slowly. The chair's scrape against the floor was louder than any gavel. "Commissioner," he said evenly, "with respect. This isn't about profit margins. It's about honoring commitments to people, not just investors." Robert chuckled. The poetry of failure." "Failure?" Lucas's voice stayed calm, but his eyes hardened. "You built half this city by cutting corners and calling it progress. I'm trying to build something that won't collapse when the wind changes." The commissioner cleared his throat. "Gentlemen, please," but Robert wasn't done. "You've always needed to prove you're different from me. Here's your chance. Just don't drag the rest of us into your conscience crisis." Lucas exhaled, then gathered his papers with deliberate care. "I appreciate your concern, Father," he said, the word coated in ice. "But if you think conscience is a weakness, then I finally understand why I spent my childhood waiting at diner counters for you to pick me up, and you never did." The room fell silent. Robert's face flickered the briefest shadow of discomfort, then smoothed again into neutrality. "We all make choices. Lucas?" "Yes," Lucas said softly. "We do." The chair of the commission leaned forward. "We'll take a short recess before continuing." As people stood, Nora watched father and son exit through opposite doors of the chamber, the air between them cold as steel. The corridor outside smelled faintly of coffee and polish. Lucas leaned against the wall, loosening his tie, staring at the floor. Robert appeared a moment later, hands in pockets. His voice was quieter now, surgical. "You don't need to do this." "I do," Lucas replied. "You're making enemies you can't afford. Investors talk, boards remember. You'll lose everything." "I've already lost everything that mattered," Lucas said. This is just the cleanup." Robert frowned. "You think integrity pays the bills? You think the city cares who holds the moral high ground when the budget's in the red?" "I don't know," Lucas said, But I'd rather find out than keep pretending your way works. Robert stepped closer, lowering his voice. You're not the only Hale in this town. Your name means something because I built it. Lucas looked up, eyes sharp as glass. Then I'll rebuild it without you. For a long moment, neither moved. The hum of distant voices filled the space between them. Then Robert gave a short, humorless laugh. You always were sentimental, just like your mother. Lucas's reply was almost a whisper. That's the only compliment you've ever given me. Robert's mouth twitched a ghost of something like regret, but it passed. He turned, walking back toward the chamber doors. You'll regret this. Maybe, Lucas said, but at least it'll be mine to regret. When the hearing resumed, the air in the room felt different, charged, brittle. Nora gripped the edge of her seat. Lucas stood again, voice steady but carrying the weight of something irreversible. Before this board proceeds, I'd like to make a statement for the record. The chair nodded. Go ahead, Mr. Hale. He looked straight ahead, not at his father, not at the cameras, but at the city crest above the dais. I hereby recuse myself from any arrangement or profit derived from partnerships involving Hale Enterprises or its subsidiaries. I will not benefit from projects that enrich my father's holdings. My allegiance is to this city, not to this blood. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Even the commissioners seemed momentarily stunned. Robert's jaw tightened, a muscle ticking near his temple. Lucas continued, calm but unflinching. Let the record show that progress means nothing if it demands silence. I choose transparency. I choose the city. The chair cleared his throat. In light of these developments, the commission will delay final review pending further documentation. Meeting adjourned, the gavel struck. As the crowd erupted in whispers, Nora rose slowly. Lucas stayed seated, shoulders slumped, eyes distant. When she reached him, she placed a hand lightly on the table. That took guts, she said. He looked up, expression unreadable. It took 30 years. She gave a faint, sad smile. Maybe it was worth the wait. He exhaled, gaze drifting toward the exit where his father had disappeared. Maybe, outside, the late afternoon light poured through the glass facade, slicing the chamber into bands of gold and shadow. For the first time, the reflection staring back at Lucas wasn't his father's silhouette. It was his own. The morning of the vote dawned cold and pale, the kind of winter light that seemed to promise nothing, yet held everything in its stillness. City Hall's chamber was standing room only. Reporters filled the back rows, residents clutched coffee cups and handwritten notes. Nora sat among them, heart pounding like a drum she was trying to steady. Lucas was already at the front. No entourage, no pretense, just a man in a gray suit. Dark circles beneath his eyes, hands clasped around a folder marked Revised Proposal Cedar View. The hearing began. Commissioners murmured through documents. Legal counsel read clauses aloud. June Caraway presented diagrams with calm precision. The proposal had changed smaller towers, tighter margins, but a bigger promise the hospice preserved, a community fund established, and profits redirected toward end-of-life care across Denver County. For an hour, questions came and went. The old guard frowned, the new voices nodded, and when silence finally fell, the chair cleared his throat. Motion to approve the amended proposal, he said, all in favor. Hands rose. 1, 2, 3, a pause. 4, 5, opposed. 2, motion carries, 5-2. The gavel struck. For a moment, no one moved. Then applause erupted, hesitant at first, then swelling like a tide that had been waiting too long to crash. Nora pressed her hand to her mouth. Tyler whooped from the back row. June grinned, tears already streaking her cheeks. And Lucas. Lucas just closed his eyes and bowed his head, the faintest incredulous smile touching his face. When he looked up, his gaze found Nora's across the room. She mouthed a single word, yes. 2 weeks later, the sky was bright enough to hurt. The groundbreaking ceremony took place on the edge of Cedar View's garden, half construction site, half sacred ground. The air smelled of new cement and pine mulch. Hard hats gleamed in the sunlight. Cameras flashed. A local pastor said a few words about building with conscience. Nora stood near the podium, boots planted in the thawing earth, the winter wind whipping her hair. Her crew had volunteered to hang a banner across the scaffolding, thick white canvas. Letters painted bold and red. It unfurled slowly as Tyler tugged the rope from above. The words rippled in the breeze. Dignity first. The crowd clapped again, but quieter this time, as if they understood the weight those words carried. Lucas stepped forward, shovel in hand. He caught Nora's eye, smiled, and said, "You should do this." She shook her head. "You started it. You kept it alive." They both held the shovel, their hands brushing. Together, they turned the soil a simple motion, but it felt like stitching something back into place. The flash of cameras followed, but for once, neither of them noticed. When the ceremony wound down, Lucas gestured for her to follow him around the corner of the site. "I have something to show you," he said. They walked behind the hospice, where a small crowd of workers had gathered around a tarp-covered shape. A low hum of curiosity filled the air. "Go on," he told her. "Pull it." Nora hesitated, then tugged the tarp free. Beneath it stood a restored neon sign, the same cursive lettering she'd seen flickering outside the diner off I-70. Frontier Diner. Its chrome edges gleamed. The glass tubes glowed a soft red-orange, warm and alive. She stared, stunned. How Lucas rubbed the back of his neck. Sheepish. "After we left that night, I bought the property from the state auction. Had the sign restored. The diner itself was beyond repair. But this," he smiled, "this I could save." He nodded toward the hospice building. "It's being installed above the kitchen door. The staff wanted a name for the new community cafe. They chose this." Her throat tightened. "Lucas, I figured your mom's light deserved to shine again," he said quietly. "So did you." She reached out, fingertips brushing the warm glass. The hum of the neon felt like a pulse, steady and alive. For a moment, the world narrowed just the glow of that sign, the sound of the wind, and the ache in her chest that was somehow equal parts grief and grace. She turned toward him. "You didn't have to do this." "I know," he said. "That's why it matters." Her lips trembled into a smile. "You remembered the lullaby?" He nodded, every note. The air around them was still, the noise of the crowd fading to a distant blur. Without meaning to, Nora began to hum, soft, low, the same fragile tune that had threaded through both their lives. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word." Lucas closed his eyes. The melody bent and shifted, the old folk rhythm giving way to the whisper of Debussy, just as it had years ago in the diner, in the church, in the spaces between them. When she finished, he didn't speak. He just looked at her, and for once, there was no distance left to cross. Snowflakes drifted down, caught in the neon glow, melting before they could land. In that light, in that quiet, the sign above them flickered once, then steadied as if settling into its second life. Nora's voice was barely a whisper. "She'd have liked this." "I think she already does," Lucas said. She smiled through the tears, the reflection of the sign painting her face in amber and rose. For the first time in years, the lullaby didn't sound like loss. It sounded like coming home. 1 year later, Cedarview's garden had become something close to holy. Where there had once been bare dirt and scaffolding, there were now tulips, lavender, and rows of wildflowers curling around the courtyard path. Wind chimes sang from the porch beams and over the kitchen door. The Frontier Diner sign glowed steady and warm, its hum part of the hospice's heartbeat now. The air smelled of cinnamon and soil. Volunteers carried trays of pineapple, cherry, one suspicious-looking peach, and set them along folding tables strung with fairy lights. Laughter mingled with the low murmur of conversation, the gentle music of life continuing. Nora stood near the piano they had rescued from the church basement, sleeves rolled up, hair pinned loosely at her neck. Her hands hovered over the keys, not performing for an audience, but coaxing the air to settle. "Music hour," she called. "You all remember the rules. No judging, no worrying about pitch, and no complaints if I mess up." Soft chuckles rippled through the crowd, patients in wheelchairs, families on picnic blankets, staff leaning on railings. She began with something simple. "Hush, little baby." The melody wound its way through the garden, light and familiar. A few voices joined in, tentative at first, then stronger. By the second verse, the tune had shifted bending, as always, into that ghost of Debussy her mother had loved. It drifted upward, blending with the hum of bees and the laughter of children chasing bubbles near the fence. When she finished, applause broke like soft rain. "That's cheating," Tyler called from the catering table. "No one competes with Ruth Bennett's girl." Nora laughed, brushing a tear from her cheek. "Then it's a good thing this isn't a competition." As the crowd dispersed for pie and coffee, she noticed him, Lucas standing by the garden gate, sleeves rolled, tie loosened, the same expression she'd seen the first day they met, through glass part mischief, part reverence. He waited until she finished greeting the hospice director before walking over. "Looks different than a year ago," he said. "Smells better too," she replied, glancing toward the kitchen window. "Though the peach pie's questionable," he chuckled, the sound low. "Easy, I'll risk it." For a moment, they simply stood side by side, watching sunlight slip through the leaves, thin gold ribbons cutting through green. "You did it," she said finally. "You built something that didn't erase what came before." He looked around at the laughter, at the light, at the sign glowing above the door. "We did it." A long silence settled, not heavy, just full. He reached into his pocket and pulled something small. A glint of silver caught the sun. He began, suddenly awkward. "Have something for you." She arched a brow. "If that's another check, I'm donating it to the Dignity Fund before you finish your sentence." "No check," he said, smiling. "Promise." He held out his palm. Resting there was a tiny paper crane, laminated in clear resin, hanging from a simple keychain loop. The folds were delicate but strong, the edges preserved forever mid-flight. She stared at it, her throat tightening. "You kept it. Couldn't throw away the thing that started all this?" he said softly. "Thought you might want to carry it this time." Her fingers brushed his as she took it. "You realize this makes us even? Even you got your building. I got my hospice. And now, apparently, I get a keepsake." He tilted his head, studying her. "Not quite even yet." "Oh." He took a small step closer. "You once told me rich men couldn't handle you." Her mouth curved, eyes glinting. "I remember." He smiled, that half smile she'd come to recognize as his way of saying, "I'm not afraid anymore. Try me." The words hung in the air, not as challenge this time, but as invitation. Nora felt laughter rise in her chest, soft and certain. "You never quit. Do you not when it matters?" She turned the keychain in her palm, the sunlight catching it like a tiny heartbeat. "What exactly are you asking?" "Lucas," he exhaled, the tension leaving his shoulders. "Stay. Not as a symbol or a trophy, I've had enough of those to last a lifetime. Stay because this." He gestured toward the garden, the hospice. "The city skyline beyond only makes sense if you're in it." Her smile faded into something quieter, deeper. "That's a dangerous kind of offer. I know." He held her gaze. "That's why it's real." The garden around them glowed in the late afternoon sun. Volunteers clinked cups. Children's laughter echoed across the lawn, and somewhere behind them. The hospice door opened, the warm neon letters of Frontier Diner, flickering gently to life as the light dimmed. Nora slipped the keychain into her pocket, then reached for his hand. "You sure you can handle this?" she asked, teasing but tender. He squeezed her fingers lightly. "I'm counting on it." They stood together, the crowd drifting around them like a tide. The lullaby began again, not played this time, but hummed by someone in the distance, carried by the breeze through the trees. Lucas looked out over the city, the skyline reflecting soft amber against the horizon. For once, it didn't feel like his to own. It felt like theirs to belong to. Nora rested her head against his shoulder. "You kept your word," she murmured. "So did you," he said, dignity first. She smiled, eyes closing, listening to the hum of the hospice, the laughter, the faint buzz of the neon sign, all of it blending into one quiet, perfect song. As the sun slipped behind the towers, the paper crane gleamed through her pocket, a small, eternal thing, caught between memory and promise. She looked up at him once more and whispered, "Try me, again." Sometimes, healing begins where we least expect it, in the quiet corners of loss, in the hands of someone we once misjudged, or in the echo of a song we thought we'd forgotten. Nora and Lucas didn't find redemption through grand gestures or perfect endings, but through listening to each other, to their own brokenness, to the spaces where love had once failed and could be rebuilt. They learned that dignity isn't something we grant, it's something we recognize in others and in ourselves. Maybe that's what it means to grow older with grace, to see that every second chance begins with the courage to stay, to try again, to build something gentle where there was once only glass. In the end, it wasn't about the city they saved or the hospice that stood. It was about the two people who learned that kindness can be an act of quiet rebellion, and that sometimes the bravest thing we can say to life is simply, "Try me." Thank you for being here with us, for listening, for feeling, and for believing that stories still have the power to heal. Every like, every share, every new subscriber isn't just a number. It's a small act of kindness, a way of keeping empathy alive in a noisy world. If this story touched your heart, help us keep the light burning. Like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories. So together, we can continue telling the quiet of human stories that remind us what it truly means to care.